Welcome, everybody. It's 10:59 my time, and we're just going to wait just a couple minutes before we get started. And we'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Before we logged in, we talked about this little awkward silence before we get started at the beginning of webinars, and I'm comfortable with awkward silences. So and once that ticks 11, there it is. And so we'll get started. And you have to forgive me. I have a cold, so I have my introductory remarks here. So forgive me if I stumble a few times. Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Career Services Assembly of the Association of Schools and Public Programs of Public Health, ASPPH. I'm Vic Masalia. I'm the Director of Career Services here at the University of Minnesota, and I'm your monitor today. I want to take a moment to share who we are and why we are here. The Career Services Assembly is a dedicated group of staff and faculty from ASPPH member institutions across the country. We are committed to supporting the career development of public health students and alumni. We collaborate, we share insights, track industry trends to ensure that those entering and advancing in public health in the public health field have the guidance and resources that they need. I'd like to give a big shout out to our chair, Brenda Nickel, and the CSA leadership for all that they've done and all that they are doing for us. Now, as we turn to today's topic, self-care during the job search, it's important to acknowledge that looking for a job can be extremely demanding under any circumstances, both mentally and emotionally. This is especially relevant today with the rapidly evolving and turbulent healthcare landscape, where shifting public health priorities have caused unprecedented stress and uncertainty. Public health professionals are trained to advocate for the well-being of communities and others, but it's just as important to extend the same care to ourselves. Our career journeys begin with developing sustainable habits, and today's webinar will offer practical strategies to help you navigate the job search while maintaining your well-being. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Andrea Haller. Andrea is a life, leadership, and career coach credentialed through the International Coaching Federation, ICF, as a certified mindfulness instructor. She is dedicated to supporting individuals on their personal and professional journeys and specializes in emotional intelligence and self-discovery. Andrea draws from her wide background in psychology and mindfulness to guide her person-first, strengths-based approach to coaching. With over 8 years of experience at Harvard across different schools and 4 years of dedicated coaching practice, she empowers students to enhance their leadership capabilities, preparing them to navigate the professional world with confidence, integrity, and authenticity. Andrea holds a BA in psychology from Boston College and an MS in global studies and international relations from Northeastern University, along with numerous certifications and trainings in coaching, mindfulness, and yoga. We'll be taking questions throughout the program, so just put them in the Q&A. So with that, I'd like to welcome Andrea.
Thank you so much, Vic. Happy to be here. And welcome to everyone who is on this call. Looking forward to spending the next 55 minutes with you all talking about self-care and talking about how to really manage stress and stressors, and hopefully have you all walk away with some really practical tools, techniques, and strategies that will help you in moments of high stress, overwhelm, and uncertainty. So really quickly, I'm just going to talk through kind of what this time is going to look like so you sort of know what to expect. We already did welcome and introductions. I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding what stressors are and help you identify some of what those stressors might be for you individually. We're going to talk about completing the stress cycle. Don't worry if you don't know what that means, we're going to get into it. And then we're also going to go into managing stress and regulating emotions. This is that more practical piece about strategies and practice. So the tools and techniques that I was mentioning that hopefully you can take and apply in your own, daily life. And then we're going to end with making a plan so that you have something to walk away with. You have a next step, an action that you can take, especially if you are feeling really overwhelmed right now. So I should also say that throughout, I will pause if there are any questions that we can kind of take throughout, but there will be, like Vic said, dedicated time at the end for Q&A. So we're going to start with talking about stress and stressors and identifying the difference between these. So, oh, I'm so sorry. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Just in the chat. Okay. So talking about the difference between stress and stressors. So stress, when we're talking about stress, it's really the neurological and physiological shift that is happening in our bodies. So these are, those kind of physiological things that you might identify when you have a racing heartbeat or maybe heightened awareness or your muscles feel really tense. Sometimes you might even feel shortness of breath, those kinds of things. That is the stress response in the body. And this is due to, kind of an uptick in hormonal activities, in neurological activities in response to a stressor. So a stressor is the internal or external event that causes that stress reaction, that sort of activates that response in the body. And this is usually due to a perception of threat. So some examples of external stressors might be things like work or finances, family, time, like time management, different cultural norms or expectations, experiences of discrimination, the job market, right? Thinking about current trends and kind of your own position, the field of public health in general, and the headwinds that we're facing. Those could all be external stressors. Internal stressors, maybe a little bit less tangible, but still very powerful. Those are things that might be self-criticism, identity, memories, thinking about sort of the future broadly, body image, things like that. Those are those more internal stressors. Either way, though, these are things that our bodies and our brains perceive as threats. And so I'm going to ask you all to take a minute here, and truly just a quick minute, to write down all of the stressors that come to mind for you. So anything that you are aware of that is currently causing you stress. Just write it down on a piece of paper or on your laptop or wherever you want to kind of get it out of your head and onto something. We'll take just one quick minute to do that. We are going to come back to this list at the end. Okay, so I know that wasn't a lot of time, but hopefully you got written down at least a couple of things that are maybe causing you stress right now. I'm gonna move on to talk about the stress response cycle. So before we go into strategies for managing stress and practicing self-care, it's really important to understand what is happening inside our bodies and why we get stuck in these stress responses and can feel overwhelmed and maybe even burnt out sometimes, especially during times of uncertainty. This is definitely something that can happen. So the stress response cycle starts with a stressor. So that's what we just talked about, right? Those internal or external perceived threats. These are things that you can hear, see, touch, taste, or imagine that could harm you. So again, perceived threat. This is going to make you feel stressed out and your body responds. So that's that second circle here is our response. And this is where the stressor is going to activate a subconscious reactionary response, which fills your body with adrenaline, with hormones, so that you can react quickly and survive the possible threat. So this is where you might have heard of fight, flight, or freeze. That's that reaction that kicks in. And then after physically exerting ourselves to survive the potential threat, our bodies return to baseline. Cortisol, which is a stress hormone, drops, and we can relax and kind of move on with our day. So this cycle is actually highly adaptive. So if we think about, way back when we weren't on our computers and we actually faced, as humans, faced real kind of threats in the wild, think of an example of maybe being chased by a lion. This is a cycle that allows you to react to that stressor immediately without thinking about it too much. And it allows your body to have a physiological response, which heightens your ability for survival. So again, if we think about that kind of heightened awareness, the burst of adrenaline, right, which will give you energy, allow you to run away from that threat. These are all things that, like I said, are highly adaptive. The problem now is that the threats that we're facing aren't lions chasing us. They are things like news alerts on our phones, things like, again, kind of thinking about long-term prospects for financial stability, or where you're going to get a job, or that conversation that you had with your boss or your colleague or your friend that maybe didn't go exactly how you wanted it to, and you keep thinking about it. So these are all those chronic stressors that we continue to think of as threats, but we no longer have an outlet for them. So that physical exertion that came, when we were running away from that lion, that's not happening anymore. And so we're getting stuck in the stress response and we're not ever getting back to baseline. So I want to share with you all a quick quote. And this is from the book, which was actually on the last slide. It's called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. They do amazing work in kind of the stress cycle and burnout, and I highly recommend this book. But this is a quote from the workbook that goes along with this book that says, "Unless you can fight or flight your way out of a problem, dealing with stress is separate from dealing with the things that cause it." So it's separate from the stressors themselves. And to deal with the stress, we actually have to complete the stress cycle. We have to exert that energy in some way in order to come back to baseline. So let me explain this a little bit more. So as I mentioned, when we don't complete that stress cycle, we can get stuck. And in the book, Amelia and Emily Nagoski talk about emotions as tunnels. And this is a really, I think, useful way of kind of highlighting how you can get stuck in the stress response and stuck in an emotion. So if you imagine that the stressor puts you into this tunnel, so you're now in a tunnel and you have to be able to kind of run out of the tunnel, but we don't do that. And so we're stuck in this tunnel and it's dark in there and we can't really see the light. And in order to be able to move forward, we have to get out of the tunnel, right? We have to see that emotion through to completion. So they talk about emotions as having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when we get stuck, in other words, we don't complete that cycle, it's like we're stuck in that dark tunnel. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that even when the initial stressor is removed, you are likely still dealing with thoughts or feelings that came up around that stressor. So let's say, for example, you received an email letting you know that your company is going to be initiating layoffs. Maybe you delete that email. You got rid of that stressor, right? That stressor is no longer in your email. It's gone, it's deleted. And yet, I would guess that you still feel stressed about it, right? There was an emotional response to that. There was a thought pattern that came up around that. There is a reaction that now you have to deal with in your body. So we hold stress in ways that other beings in this world don't. If you think about, we all have probably seen a dog see another dog on the street, right? And what happens when they see another dog? Sometimes they get really excited. Sometimes they start barking. Maybe their hair stands on end a little bit. And then you pull that dog away, and what happens? The dog goes back, right? It's like that interaction never happened. It goes back to normal. It's kind of trotting along, perfectly happy again. And so if we think about that actual interaction between the dogs, there's energy that's expended, right? They're barking. They are, like I said, maybe they're kind of physically, their hair goes on end, or you kind of see them with their body position change or things like that. There is a way that they are expending some energy and completing that cycle and then moving on. Whereas we now, with these chronic stressors, we don't expend that and we get stuck. So this slide highlights 7 strategies that are talked about in the book, the Burnout book, for completing the stress cycle. And these are movement, breathing, positive social interaction, laughter, affection, crying, and creative expression. And there's a little bit of a description of each of these. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail, but these are all ways that you can complete the stress cycle and let go of some of that emotion, release some of those feelings and thoughts, and move through that tunnel to the end so that we're not getting stuck. Okay, so I want to share this other quote with you now that we understand the stress cycle and kind of what's happening in our bodies when we get stuck in these tunnels of emotions. We're going to move on to practical strategies for dealing with chronic stress. So some of those coping mechanisms are also going to be in what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this time. But this quote, I think, really encapsulates the idea of sort of the rest of this presentation here, which is that we're trying to find space between the stressor and the response. So between stimulus and response lies a space. In that space lies our freedom and our power to choose a response. In that response lies our growth and our happiness. So the idea here that I want all of you to take away with is that we can't always control the stressors that come up. Something is going to happen. You're going to have a reaction to it. Thoughts, emotions are going to come up. Our brains create thoughts about every 6 seconds. It's probably even less than that. But it's impossible to actually control thoughts and emotions from just coming up and stressors from just happening, right? But what we can do is we can create a space, we can create a pause where we notice what's coming up. We notice the fact that we had a thought, we had an emotion, there is a stressor, and we can choose how we want to respond to that. So instead of having an immediate reaction to something, we get to pause and we get to choose. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of this time, and sharing some practical tools and strategies for grounding ourselves in the moment and practicing that pause. So speaking of pausing, I'm going to take a quick pause here and see if there are any questions so far that I could answer before we move on to the practical part of the session.
Just a reminder, there's that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to write something in there.
All right. Well, if there's nothing for right now, then I'll keep moving on. We'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end. Okay. So these are a couple of acronyms that can help you practice the pause. So on the left here, we have STOP, which is a way to kind of remember to, stop what you're doing and pause for a moment when you notice either a thought come up or a certain emotion, or you're encountering a stressor that you're identifying as a stressor, and take a deep breath, right? Center yourself. We're going to talk about breathing as one of the ways to ground yourself, but in this acronym, that's the example here. Observe your present moment experience. So this is again about really noticing what's going on. That awareness piece is so important because the awareness is what allows us to make a choice. We can't decide how we're going to respond to something if we're not aware of what's going on, right? So that pause is what allows us to really take a moment to be aware. And then again, proceed with awareness. So decide what you're going to do, how you're going to respond to that stressor. And then on the right, very similar idea here, just a slightly different acronym. RAIN is the acronym. So R, recognize what's going on, what's happening in your body. Allow that experience to just be as it is, right? So some of this is also about non-judgment and just noticing, I'm having an emotion right now. I'm having a thought. There's a stressor, that thing is really stressing me out. And just allowing that to be. So instead of thinking, I shouldn't be thinking that way, or I want to push that thought away, or I don't have time to, oh, whoops, sorry about that. I don't have time to deal with this emotion. We're just going to allow that experience and move through it again, move through that tunnel. Investigate with interest and care. So, what is going on? What kind of happened here? Allowing yourself to engage with your thoughts and your feelings with curiosity, and then nurturing with self-compassion. So again, taking away that judgment, really being sort of compassionate with whatever experience you're having in the same way that you likely would, if you were talking to a friend or a loved one. What are kind of the encouraging things that you would say to them, and trying to practice that for yourself.
Andrea, we have
Yeah.
a comment here that
Yeah.
the attendee says, I'm concerned about the separation between an immediate and perceived threat, as if they are mutually exclusive. How can this topic extend beyond the individual approaches to societal-based changes, such as advocacy and political engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for a lot of the kind of practical tools that we're going to be talking about, it is sort of for that individual pause and kind of how do I deal with this stressor that is coming to me. And of course, we know that we can't manage all of the stressors that are coming at us at an individual level, that there really is kind of a systemic way that we need to be handling this. And so I would say to that it really starts with awareness. And if you can cultivate that awareness in yourself and recognize what is coming up for you, then you can choose how you want to respond to that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the end, about sort of making a plan and how to take action. But it's going to be about, noticing, okay, these are some of the stressors. These are some of the sort of societal or systemic or institutional stressors that I'm dealing with, or that, the field of public health is dealing with in general. And I know that I have X reaction to any of them. And now I am in a place where I have, I've paused, I have reflected on that. And now I can decide how I'm going to take action. And maybe that means I'm going to group some people in, and we're going to decide how to take action together. And we are going to build a collective, kind of movement or resistance or whatever to the stressors. But it really does have to start with the awareness and the pause so that you can make that choice instead of having an immediate reaction to whatever it is that comes up. And so another way to think about it might be the difference between you exerting control over your emotional landscape versus your emotions exerting control over you. I hope that helps to address that a little bit. Okay. So moving on to some of the kind of practices that we're going to talk about here. So this list is really more about daily practices and long-term strategies. So this isn't actually where we're going to spend the bulk of the time today, but I want you all to see this. So these are all things that we have probably heard before, right? We know that getting enough sleep is important. We know that prioritizing nutrition and exercise, movement is good for us, practicing mindfulness, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that I want you all to think of as going to the gym for your stress resilience muscle. So building capacity for emotional regulation and managing stress is a skill. And so if you put in the time, the energy, the effort on a consistent long-term basis, you're going to build that capacity. So you're going to have more resilience and stress management muscles to flex, right? So that's how I want you to think about this. You don't have to do all of them, right? This is also a very flexible and dynamic and personal individual thing where some daily practices might work for some people, others might work for others. It's very dependent on what, where you're at, what works for you, and also potentially the phase of life that you're in. There might be times where, I'm gonna have to give up on sleep a little bit because I have some deadlines coming up. But I'm gonna try to make sure that I'm kind of flattening out that curve when I have a little bit more capacity. So a lot of it is also just being realistic with yourself, meeting yourself where you're at. I want to highlight quickly the last one on here, understanding your energy capacity. So what activities energize or drain you or feel neutral. And I'm going to go a little bit more into this in the next slide here. So we're not going to do this exercise right now, but this is a really good way to get kind of a baseline understanding for yourself of where your energy is going throughout the day. So one thing that you can do here is like the instructions say here, write down everything that you do in a typical day. And then you label each activity as either energizing, draining, or neutral. So really, again, being honest with yourself, reflecting on what are the things that you do in a given day that light you up, right? That really fill you with a sense of energy and fulfillment and purpose and, whatever it is. And then what are the things that are really draining? You eat, and these also might be things that you're good at. These could be things that you've learned, you've been trained in, you're skilled at, but you actually feel pretty drained when you do them. And then what are the things that are neutral, right? I brush my teeth every day. I don't really feel any sort of way about it. It's kind of neutral. And so those are, things that do take time. They are part of our day. But it's not really impacting my stress level one way or another. And then realizing, how much time are you spending on draining activities versus energizing activities? Are there any draining activities that you could cut, that maybe could be trimmed, that maybe could be delegated, right? Maybe you work on a team, or maybe you're a student and in a group project, and maybe you could kind of do this collectively and think about what are people's strengths and how can we collaborate in a way that works to people's strengths. And some people might be really find it really energizing to kind of organize and manage a project, and other people might hate doing that, right? So how do I incorporate some of this knowledge into how I'm setting up and structuring my day-to-day? Okay. Moving on now to in the moment techniques. So this is what we're going to spend most of the time talking about here. There are all sorts of different methods to ground yourself in the moment, to maybe shift your mood in the moment, and really allow yourself to practice that pause. So I want to highlight here and be clear that even though, I spent a lot of time talking about completing that stress cycle, I very much recognize that sometimes we can't do that in the moment, right? Sometimes it is unrealistic that we are going to be able to just get up and start dancing or go for a run or whatever it is that we need to expend that energy. And so sometimes what we need to do is we need to ground ourselves. We need to come back to the moment, or maybe we actually need to avoid. We need to shift our mood. We need to kind of push that stressor away for a second so that we can be present with whatever it is that's going on. But then we want to come back to it, right? So if we again think about that tunnel of emotion, we don't want to get stuck in it. We know that even if we avoid the stressor, our body is still holding on to that stress response. And so, let's say I'm in a meeting and I'm having a reaction to what is being talked about. Maybe I am nervous about future prospects of grant funding or something like that. But in that meeting, and maybe I'm feeling really emotional about it. Maybe I'm scared and maybe I feel like I want to cry. But it doesn't feel appropriate to do that in that setting. And so maybe I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm going to just count in my head. I'm just kind of pulling some of these techniques that are listed here. I'm going to go through some of them in more detail. But I'm going to pick something that's going to ground me in the moment. And then I'm going to create that pause and I'm going to choose what to do. Okay, in this moment, it's not appropriate to complete the cycle. It's not appropriate to have that emotional reaction or response that I know is going to kind of release what I'm feeling. But I'm going to try to come back to that later. So I'm going to make a note. I'm going to make a little check in my head or a little asterisk to say, okay, I'm putting this aside right now. And then later when I have time and when it is kind of an appropriate or safe space to do that, I'm going to come back and complete the cycle. So maybe that's saying I'm going to go for a walk at the end of the day, or I'm going to call my friend and engage in that positive social interaction when I have 5 minutes after this meeting. So again, it's about creating that pause, choosing how you respond to something. Okay, so I'm going to just talk through some of the techniques here, and this is where we're going to get sort of practical. So we are going to do a little bit of practice. So there are different breathing techniques that I have listed here. Deep belly breathing, focused intentional breath. So just sort of noticing and maybe even saying to yourself, I am breathing in, I am breathing out. Box breathing, that is where you count for 4, take an inhale for the count of 4, hold that for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold the exhale for a count of 4, and keep going in that kind of box pattern of, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Double inhale, extended exhale, that's where you would take a normal breath in and then a quick second breath in, and then a long extended exhale. And then I think those are all the breathing techniques that I put on there. Yeah, okay. So those are some of the breathing techniques. We're going to practice some of those in a second. And then other things that you can do to kind of ground yourself, bring yourself back to the present moment is focus on the things around you, right? What is going on? What are some things that I can see in my physical environment? What are some things that I can hear or touch or feel or smell or taste, even if it's my own saliva, right? What is something that's that present moment experience that's happening right now, right here? Sometimes connecting to physical sensations. So maybe feeling your feet on the ground or feeling the clothes against your skin, or pressing your fingers together and just really feeling that tension. Just something that kind of brings you back into physical present moment awareness. A body scan is another way to direct our attention to some kind of grounding, going through, just really quickly noticing my head, noticing my shoulder, my neck and my shoulders, my arms, my torso, my hips, legs, ankles, feet, whatever, just kind of quickly going through and realizing I am here, right? I am here in this moment right now. This is my body here. I am feeling myself physically taking up space here and grounding yourself in that moment. Progressive muscle relaxation is another example of kind of physical sensation, and this is a little bit more active. So in this one, you can actually tense muscles and then release, and that promotes a feeling of relaxation. So you could squeeze your fists really tight for a couple of seconds and then release, and notice how that creates a little bit more space and a little bit more softness in your body. And then counting and listing things or describing your surroundings. The idea here is just to give your brain something to do. So we're trying to give that kind of busy mind, all of those thoughts racing around, something else to chew on. And so even if it's just counting to 10 or counting backwards from 10, listing things that you see around you, or maybe just in your head, listing all of the animals that you can think of that start with A, right? Describing your surroundings. I think I said that. Yeah. So again, it's just giving your mind kind of something else to think about until you feel a little bit calmer, until your physiological response to whatever stressor you're encountering has slowed, has calmed a little bit. Okay, so I'll talk about mood shifters in a second, but we're gonna practice some of these grounding techniques. So we're gonna start with belly breathing here. So I'm actually gonna adjust my camera slightly so you can see me. So I want you all to bring your hands right to that V where your ribs come together. So bring your fingers right into that V, and then allow your palms to rest to either side of that. So this is where your diaphragm is. And so we're gonna take some breaths from our diaphragm. And the idea here is really to expand the rib cage out as we're breathing. So instead of thinking about pushing the belly forward, we want to think about full torso expansion out. So the reason we're having our hands here is because we'll notice our hands moving, right? So I want you all to take a deep inhale through your nose and feel your hands expand out as if you were blowing up a balloon here. And then exhale out the mouth, let it go. And feel how the hands come in, your belly contracts. So we'll take a few more. So inhaling to expand out, relaxing the belly, really letting it grow. And then exhale, feel that contraction. And then you might, if you want to just have one hand on your belly and then take the other hand to your chest, and just take a couple of natural breaths and notice the difference. So notice how your hand on your chest might move a little bit more. Maybe the belly doesn't expand quite as much when you're just engaged in kind of that natural cycle of breathing. And so when you bring your breath intentionally into your belly, this can create more of a relaxation kind of response. So this is one really easy way to, in the moment, bring yourself back to present, to grounding, and to, again, create that pause so that we can kind of choose how we want to proceed in that moment. The box breathing was another one that I already kind of talked through. So let's just do a really quick practice of that. So we're going to inhale for a count of 4. So inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, and then hold that for 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale for 4, 3, 2, 1, and hold 4, 3, 2, 1. And you would keep doing that. You would keep following that cycle and counting your breaths for, for in, for hold, for out, for hold. Okay. let's see, what else do we have here? The double inhale, extended exhale. So that's gonna be, like I said, it's a natural inhale, so just a normal in breath. And then you're gonna add a quick second breath to that. So it'll be an inhale. So everybody try that, do a normal in breath, and then a quick in breath, and then an exhale. And the idea here with extending the exhale, and you can do just a normal breath with an extended exhale also, is that an inhale is an energizing breath. So you might feel your heart rate increasing with an inhale, and an exhale is a relaxing breath. So you will feel your heart rate start to decrease with the exhale. So creating that longer exhale starts to bring our body back into a state of parasympathetic nervous system response or relaxation. Okay, quickly talking about mood shifters. So like I said before, there might be situations where you really need to avoid something, right? It's just not, you can't be thinking about whatever stressor is coming. And you need to be able to kind of shift your mood in the moment, come back to it later. So things that we actually know really well or work really well to shift mood, music, right? Music is a really great tool. And I think a lot of us know sort of intuitively, yeah, when I want to get hyped up, I play this one song, right? So using that as an intentional tool to shift your mood can be really powerful. Other things, calling or texting a friend, that may or may not be something that you can do in the moment, but maybe you can do, right after. This also would help to sort of complete that cycle with that positive social interaction. Changing scenery or position. Sometimes, if you're in a meeting, obviously you're probably not going to just get up and walk out. But if you're maybe at your computer and you're feeling stressed about a news article that you just read or an email that you just received, even just getting up and going to a different location, giving yourself a beat and then coming back can be helpful. Even just changing position. I won't go too much into this, but there is some research about body language having a physiological impact on our stress responses. So, and this, you can see this in the animal kingdom too. When people are trying to, when animals are trying to portray confidence and power, they get big, right? They make themselves big. And when they're weak or submissive, they make themselves small, right? We do the same thing. So if you think about, if you're feeling stressed, you might have your arms crossed, you might have your hands on your neck. You're gonna sort of cave in on yourself. Whereas if you're feeling really confident and you're feeling powerful, you're gonna have a bigger, open, wider stance. And research actually shows that it's sort of bidirectional. So you can create that feeling by engaging in that positioning. So this is research by social psychologist Amy Cuddy. She's over at the Harvard Business School, and she has an amazing TED Talk if anyone wants to look her up. But she calls this power posing. And so if we just take 2 minutes to find a power pose for ourselves. So that could be, having your hands on your hips and standing with your legs kind of wider than hips width distance, or, arms out wide like this. All it takes is 2 minutes of power posing for our cortisol levels. Again, that's that stress hormone to go down and confidence levels to go up. So this is a really great way if you're, again, if you're kind of in a meeting or something, maybe you can't walk out, but you could make yourself a little bit bigger, right? You could kind of put your hands on your hips or something like that. So that's a great way to engage there. And then watching something that is going to distract you, right? So one of the examples that I often give when I talk about this is if you're doom scrolling on, whatever social media app you're using, you might not be able to look away. And this is really important to meet yourself where you're at. Those apps are designed to keep our attention, but maybe take a moment and look look up a video that's gonna make you laugh, or it's something, it's cute or it's funny, or maybe it's a place that you want to visit in nature, and it's gonna bring you a little bit of joy. And the nice thing about this technique too is that the more that you do this, the more the algorithm is going to show you these kinds of things. So you might actually find that your feed is broken up by some of these videos or posts or whatever that are actually not doom and gloom, right? That maybe bring you a little bit of joy. Okay. So we're going to go back to our list that we made earlier. So at the beginning, when we talked about, or when you wrote down all the things that are stressing you out right now, I want you to look at that list and draw a circle. And inside the circle, you're going to put all of the things from your list of stressors that are either within your control or that you can take a specific action to bring them more within your control. So, for example, if one of my stressors is current job market trends, I might not necessarily be able to control that, right? I don't have personal control over what's going on in the job market. But I do have control over how I engage with that information, right? We're practicing again that pausing and choosing how to respond to things instead of just reacting to our stressors. So maybe I say, okay, I recognize that current job trends are outside of my control. They're causing me a lot of stress, but I'm also spending a lot of time, maybe hours every day, scrolling through news articles about layoffs. And so one thing I could control is how much time I spend reading those articles, or what situation I am in when I am engaging with that news. So maybe the action I'm going to take is I'm going to set aside a specific block of time where I'm going to update myself on current trends. And then outside of that time, I'm going to turn off those alerts. And I'm going to know that I will come back to that. I am going to keep myself up to date, but I'm not going to subject myself to the fire hose of news 24/7. The idea here is that we want to take back some agency and really feel empowered to take actions on the things that we can control while letting go of some of those things that we can't. So take just a couple of minutes here to divide up your list. So again, inside that circle are the things that you can control. Either you have direct control over them, or there are actions that you could take to take back some of your agency. And then outside of the circle are things that are really completely outside of your control. You need to either let them go, or you need to manage the underlying stress with some of those techniques that we talked about, as opposed to taking action on the direct stressor, because you might not be able to do that. So we're going to take 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes to do that. Take 1 more minute here. Okay, so hopefully this at least gets you started in thinking about what are some of the things that you can control, what are some of the things that you can't control, and bringing a little bit of sense of agency and empowerment back. The last thing that I want to talk about here is kind of putting it all together and making a plan. So we have some more clarity about our stressors. Let's take some action. It's important to start small so that we don't further overwhelm our systems. So I would recommend that from inside your circle, that activity that we just did, pick one or two things to focus on first, right? Once you kind of have that under control or feel like you're sort of taking action and managing, then you can come back to your circle and pick more things. But start with just one or two and start to make a plan. So what are the specific actions that you can take to manage that stressor that you've chosen? Maybe, like I gave the example before, it's dedicating specific time blocks, maybe to applying for jobs or networking. Maybe it's intentionally searching for content on social media that makes you happy. That's, that other example that I was giving. Maybe it's teaming up with a friend for accountability or, a kind of accountability buddy to work on the job search process together. Maybe it's creating a checklist to be prepared in case you do get laid off or your grant funding doesn't come through. What are you going to do in that scenario, right? Really thinking through what are the steps that I'm going to take if this kind of worst case scenario thing were to happen, so that you do feel prepared. We also need to recognize that even when we have an action plan to deal with some of our stressors, we're still probably holding a lot of stress, right? So that difference, like I was talking about, between the stress and the stressor. So we also need to engage in some of these grounding techniques, mood shifters, experiment with different things, and hopefully prioritize 2 or 3 of those more long-term strategies to manage stress and engage in self-care in kind of a sustainable way. Again, experiment, right? Try things, see what works for you, see what resonates with you. And like I said before, always meet yourself where you're at. Remember that this is a fluid, dynamic practice. That's why we call it a practice. It's not perfect. It's always going to be a work in progress. So, maybe it's I'm going to decide, from this plan, I'm going to decide that I'm going to commit to going for a walk 3 times a week. And then I realize my schedule is actually all over the place right now, and it's really hard to commit to that specific time. And it's actually stressing me out more now to try to incorporate this into my daily schedule. So I'm going to say, you know what, maybe I can't commit to that right now, but I can commit to putting my phone away 30 minutes before I go to bed. And so I'm going to limit my screen time. And that's the strategy I'm going to try instead, right? So again, give yourself grace, meet yourself where you're at, try different things, see what works. This is a multi-pronged approach, right? Think of this plan as a way to kind of tackle self-care from all the different angles. It's the stressor, it's completing the stress cycle to get out of that emotional tunnel. It's creating that pause between reaction and response using these grounding techniques. And it's building our capacity, building that muscle of stress management and resilience over time by continuing to go to the gym with these practices. Okay, so with that, it's time for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was just terrific. And when we did the breathing exercises, it was just great timing for me. We did receive one question, was when you talked about the mood shifters, one of the participants asked if you could explain what mental time travel is.
Yes, great question. I'm sorry I did not go into detail about that. Yeah, so mental time travel is really using our capacity for visualization and imagination, really. So it can go in either direction. So let's say that you are stressed about an upcoming exam. One technique in that moment might be to do some future mental travel where you ask yourself, how am I going to feel about this in a month or 2 months or whatever? And you really try to visualize yourself 2 months from now. How am I going to be feeling about that particular stressor in the future? And recognizing that this isn't a permanent stressor, that you're going to get through it, and that realistically, 2 months from now, you're probably not going to be stressed about that particular thing, can be really helpful for shifting your perspective and shifting your mood in the moment. Similarly, you could go to the past, right? How have I felt about this particular type of thing in the past? How did I get through that? Did I feel the same way 2 weeks after it happened or whatever? So really engaging in both past experience and kind of future forecasting for how am I going to feel. Now, I do want to say this is not always an appropriate technique. So for times that are sort of chronically uncertain, like a lot of what we're facing right now, you might ask yourself, how am I going to feel in 2 months? And the reality is probably the same, right? So that's not a useful technique. So I think it is really important to remember that, everything that I talked about they're good tools, they're good strategies, and you have to think about what is going to work for you in a particular moment. So there might be cases where mental time travel is really useful, and there might be other cases where it's really not, and it's going to be much more beneficial to try one of the other techniques or strategies.
I appreciate that. I hadn't thought about future time travel for me mentally. I usually go, I was stationed in Hawaii in the Air Force, and I remember floating in the ocean. It's so when I get in a stressful situation, my mantra is floating in the ocean,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
ocean. But I like the idea of like future-oriented mental time travel, so
Mhm.
I'll need to give that a shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any additional questions? Well, seeing none so far, I wanted to really thank you, Andrea, for this
Yeah, of course.
terrific presentation. One of my big takeaways will be actually putting this in a planful way. So it's really, I don't have to like chase these techniques, and then really try to be proactive on my day to day. And for all those that are in a career transition or finding a new job, I hope you will utilize these tools going forward. And we have this webinar has been recorded too. There's a QR code here if you'd like to take a snapshot of that. Give you a second to do that, or email externalrelations@aspph.org. And then also next week is National Public Health Week, and we have a couple webinars coming at you on April 8th and April 10th. One is Now More Than Ever, Inspiring the Next Generation of Public Health Leaders. And then 30 years of National Public Health Week, reflecting on progress, inspiring the future. So with that, I want to wish you all the best. Take care, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you all so much.